Hello, everybody, and welcome back to Every Week English with Josh Golson. Um, yeah, good to see everybody again. And I hope you guys enjoy it. Make sure to like it, share it, subscribe, that sort of thing. The biggest thing really is that you learn something, right? And throughout all my classes, I make sure that my students have fun while learning. I think it's the best way you can do it, really. Through different games, through lots of talking, role plays as well. A very fun one is to be a waiter and a diner, right? So somebody who takes your order and somebody who places the order, and then um, you ask for something. The waiter says, "Oh, I'm sorry, we don't have this," but then you we have lots of other random wacky things. Like I was doing it earlier with a pre-intermediate class, and I was the waiter. I said, the diner asked for French fries. I said, I'm sorry, we don't have French fries, but we've got squids, tentacles, we've got baby chickens, and we have shark's legs, right? Um, yeah, that sort of thing makes them laugh a lot. Um, Now, that is to say that this podcast episode, we will be talking about money, all things money vocabulary, um, going along with our idioms as well. And I would like to cover present perfect also. Present perfect is a very tricky one. So we'll hop into that right now. Typically, it's have or has plus the past participle. So I have, you have, we have, they have, right? Worked. That's the past participle. For most regular verbs, right, the past participle is just the same form, right? It's just that ed again. So it goes work, worked, worked. But if it's for irregular, it changes completely. You know, like eat, ate, eaten. So he, she, it has, right, eaten recently. Now, along with that, you get three very special adverbs: yet, already, and just, right? So yet is that you haven't done something, but you have the possibility to still do it, and you might be planning to do it in the future. Already, of course, it means that you did it just before, right? Or you have done it before. And of course, just means that it happened really recent. Um, so if I say I've already eaten, right, that means I had lunch today. If I say I have just eaten, it means I ate 10 minutes ago. And if I say I have not eaten yet, right, it means I'm planning to eat, right, after the podcast, for example. Now, we use this typically for past experiences and recent past actions. What I always highlight to all my students is mostly for experiences, for work, and for travel, right? So very common questions to ask is like, have you ever done this, right? So have you ever gone skydiving? No, I have not gone skydiving, right? Have you ever gone to Poland? Yes, I have gone to Poland, lovely place, would like to visit it again, right? Or I have worked as a salesman, right? So I have that previous experience in me still. But I don't work as a salesman now, so I've been working or I have worked as a teacher, right, for 3 years. Um, that's the biggest difference with those. Likewise, there's a very fun game that rhymes. It's often a party game where you say, never have I ever done, right, or gone. So, for example, never have I ever gone to Lithuania, right? And normally you play it in a group. So whoever has gone to Lithuania raises their hand, they take a shot of something or they drink, and they talk about their experiences. Now you can use this, you have to play it when everybody is honest, right? So totally honest. Um, so, you know, you can say like, never have I ever kissed my sister, right? I don't have a sister, so it's honest. And can you imagine the juicy salaciousness? Um, if someone raises their hand, right? It's totally crazy. And so everybody laughs a lot. It's a very fun party game. Never have I ever. Um, Now, likewise, so that's present perfect. The biggest difference between it and past simple is that past simple is a finished action in the past, right? And if you are talking in the past, you use a specific date or time word, right? Like I went to Poland in 2018, right? Versus I've gone to Poland. When you use the present perfect, you don't have to say a time word. It's just sometime in the past, and that experience is with you, right? Likewise, if you just say I went to Poland, right? It means you are never going back, right? You're not planning to, right? Or you're dead, right? So if someone has died, right, you say they went to these places, past finished action. Yep, that's the biggest difference. On to our idioms. So our idioms are give it a whirl. So it's just to try something, right? Fish out of water is to be completely new somewhere, right? And to be out of your comfort zone and in the fast lane. So it's very exciting life. You do very exciting things if you are in the fast lane. Now, likewise with those, I'd like to go over some verbs and nouns for money. So, of course, we've got be worth, borrow, can't afford, charge, cost, earn, inherit, invest, lend, owe, raise, save, and waste. Now, worth is subjective, right? Subjective value. I often use my t-shirts as an example, right? And I will try to sell a t-shirt to a student, right? So I like to wear very old t-shirts from when I was a Boy Scout back in like 2013, right? So to me, this t-shirt, it is worth a lot. I always tell them, I say it's like, all right, for me, it's worth $1,000 because it's got memories, it's very sentimental for me. But for them, right, it's worth nothing. They wouldn't even give me $5 for the t-shirt. So worth is very subjective. It changes. And it changes along with the market also. So for example, if this was the last t-shirt on Earth, right, that would be worth a lot of money. So market definitely affects worth. Um, to borrow something means that you take like money from someone, right? And lend is the other side to that, which is to give money or something to someone else. And along with borrow goes the word owe, right? So if I borrow $100 from you, I owe you $100 and you lent me that $100, right? Now, to afford just means you have the money to pay for something. People charge you money, businesses charge you. Then cost is what you can think of as the objective value, or it's the dollar signs on something. So I know the cost changes based on like sales or skydka. And then to earn, right, you can earn a bad reputation, but typically you earn a salary, right? So it's when you are doing something of value and you get something back for that value. So typically, if you do something bad, right, you can earn a bad reputation. To inherit, it's if your ancestors, right, if you guys remember, give you something, right, after they die. Of course, I think we all know invest. Now, raise. Raise is an interesting one. Because you raise money for charity, you raise money for, you could do it for yourself even, and you can also get a raise, right? So it becomes a noun, which means you get, let's say, for example, I make $8 an hour, but then I get a raise of $1, right? So I got a raise. Of course, to save money, you put it into the bank, and to waste money, it's very different than spending money. because spending money, you want those things, right? Versus wasting money is on something that you don't really want. Um, and that's typically how it goes. When, so those are really good verbs to keep in mind when talking about money. And then for nouns, right, you have bill or check. You got your budget, insurance, loan, mortgage, right? And that comes from the French, I believe. So mortgage means death agreement, right? And of course, taxes. Everybody knows that one. Now, with bill, it's very funny in Russian. It is shot, right? And shot sounds very similar to shot, right? Like, give me a shot, give me a shot of vodka. So my very first week that I was here in Moscow, um, I was with my friend Tom, who also was from my university. He was my roommate. And, well, I was asked students, what do Americans think Russians drink? Right? And it's vodka. So we went to a restaurant right before the first class, and we ordered vodka, right? A shot of vodka. And so, I took the shot. We've done it. We're truly Russian, right? It's not like Samagon or moonshine, anything like that. Just Americans think of Russians as potato vodka drinkers. And the Russian word for bill or check is shot. So the waiter comes by, I say, можно shot, right? Which means, may I or can I have the check? And he thinks I'm being like funny or he didn't understand me. And so he brought us another shot, right? So being polite, we shoot it down and I say, no, можно shot, right? Trying to correct my pronunciation. And of course, Bog, we say Bog lubit troitsa, which God loves threes, right? Like the Holy Trinity. So he brings us a third one. And finally, I just show him Google Translate on my phone, and I'm like, no, please. So for our very first class, we were, I'll say not sloshed, but a little bit drunk that day. Quite an interesting time. And then when talking about money, everything changes, right? We went over value, that sort of thing. The most common thing, and this is not financial advice, but land typically goes up in value, right? So if someone were to ask my advice for how to invest, I would say like buy property, right? That could be an apartment or a house, that sort of thing. Could just be property out in the woods for development. Because I think in going back throughout history, it is the most profitable thing you can do. And it's the safest. Okay, maybe not the most profitable, but it is the safest thing to invest in. Life is actually like that game Monopoly, right? You just go around buying properties and then renting the properties. It's quite funny. And when it comes to like utilities, that sort of thing, over here in Russia, it's very, very cheap. It's like $20 a month for all utilities, I believe. So gas, electricity, because there's natural resources here, right? So again, the market chooses, right, basically what costs more. And if you live in a place that has natural resources like gas, then of course your utilities are going to be low. Russia, for a Westerner especially, is quite a cheap place. And comparing it to Europe, right, it is at least twice as cheap. I've heard Belarus is even cheaper than, Russia. And I've gone to places like Dagestan and Kyrgyzstan and Kazakhstan as well. So Kyrgyzstan is 3 times cheaper than Moscow, right? Like Bishkek, the capital is. It's fantastic. Thailand also is quite cheap, although apartments, if you're looking as a Westerner, it can be quite expensive out there. Um, really, you have to shop around, right? And you have to do what's called being price conscious. So you think about the prices, right? And you look for the best deals. We have some other good words for people who look for deals. You can call them cheapskates, and there's a TLC show called Extreme Cheapskates. You can look it up on YouTube. It's very cringe what these people do, but it's very entertaining. So, for example, a family of 3 will all take a bath together, right? Or share the same bath water, right? To save 50 cents on it. Or they won't buy toilet paper. They'll use free newspapers, right? Crazy things like that. Or this one we were watching, basically they dug a hole in the ground and used that as a refrigerator instead of paying for electricity for the refrigerator. Um, yeah, it is pretty wild. Um, you can also call this the hobo mindset. And growing up, my parents all I had a feeling, at least whenever we went out to eat, to choose the cheapest thing with the most value, right? So the best bang for your buck, basically. And that sort of went on into my university, where my parents paid for, the first semester, as I have talked about, of food, and then they stopped paying. And so I've talked about this before, I believe, where just trying to save the most amount of money. And like I said back then, it's called the hobo mindset. Very, very interesting. It took a while to break out of that mold, to be like, all right, I want this and I'm going to spend money on it, right? Quite different now. Um, Especially being an adult living on your own, and especially with a wife and a dog, it is quite different. Although I still think I'm quite good at saving money. Don't really have many wants. For a while, I just spent it on like video games whenever they went on sale. Stopped playing video games for a bit, got into Warhammer, expensive hobby. Um, and so there, the want is to spend money on it. But the thing is, here in Russia, there's a thriving side market where they cast the models and they look almost exactly like the regular models from Games Workshop. And it is 3 times cheaper, right? Um, Likewise, if you don't like painting, you can hire somebody to paint the models for you. And I was very tempted at first because in the States, to paint a single model, for example, it would cost like $50. Over here, it costs 15. To paint a whole army, right, it would have cost me $120 over here, but in the States, it would have cost me maybe $400, right? So there's a very big difference. But besides Warhammer, I don't really spend money. Maybe on Saturdays for a steak or a hamburger. And again, steaks over here, you can get a good one for maybe $4 from the grocery store. Just cook it up yourself, easy peasy. Nothing wrong with that, right? If you want a high-end steak at the grocery store, it's $7, right? That's it. It is quite interesting. I know going onwards, we talk about banks and percentages, that sort of thing. I was looking in the States to get a mortgage now. It's like 6.25% interest, right? Interest rate. Over in Latvia, some people were telling me that it's about the same, or 6.5. They were telling me that prices have tripled, right, since last year. It is crazy, and Latvia has one of the highest inflation rates in Europe. For the States, you can really judge this by McDonald's, and we have something called the Big Mac Index, right? So because McDonald's is in almost every country on earth, the price of the Big Mac is adjusted to the local currency and how much they can afford to spend on a Big Mac. And it's really a good way to see how expensive a place is. So, like Switzerland, I believe, is the highest Big Mac index, um, where one Big Mac would cost you maybe $7.50, versus Russia is the lowest at like currently the last I saw is 2.5, right? And that's it. So groceries over here quite cheap. And luckily inflation hasn't really caught on. The biggest thing is looking at like mortgages, and property value. So for example, the government requires a 20% down payment, which is the first payment on a mortgage, right? And the interest rates, if you are buying an old previous apartment from someone else, it's like 15%. Otherwise, it's also around like 6%. Uh, it's interesting to say the least. Um, Now, shopping is quite fun. I think the wife and I we do it every once in a while, like every couple of weeks, at least once a month. Going to a shopping mall is sort of a big event. You know, you walk around, you get 10,000 steps looking in at every place. It's funny, we don't often buy things, but you know, we call it window shopping, which is just to look around. Um, and then you go eat at the mall. And of course, there's lots of options there as well. Um, Now, tons of stores said they were leaving Russia, um, and they made a big public showing about leaving Russia. But in reality, their merchandise is still here. They're just under different names. Um, so, for example, Nike um, would have become something like Kion, right? Or they would call it like Biegit, which means running. So the Nike shop is no longer the Nike shop, it becomes the running shop, right? Just very generic names like that. Or it's the same for Adidas and Reebok and all the other big name brands like that. Gucci, Versace, they're all still here, just under different, you know, quote unquote Russian names. Um, and it is really funny because they get like bonus points for leaving Russia. But, you know, again, in reality, they're still here. Um, Likewise, with shopping goes like secondhand things. So when I was a kid in high school, we used to go to Salvation Army, biggest charity shop in the States. And over there, you would buy secondhand goods. I remember for my freshman or first year homecoming, um, I got a pinstripe purple coat, like really, really old fashioned from Salvation Army. Um, yeah, it saved a bunch of money because it was only like $5 for it, right? Um, and I know a couple of people who have become, you know, very large in Eastern Europe for secondhand goods, especially for shoes. And so they would go to, you know, more Western countries like Germany or France, buy up their secondhand goods, shoes, and clean them off, right? Take them back, and because they're leather shoes they specialize in, the leather has already been broken in, so they can sell it at quite a profit, even though like new shoes, let's say it cost 100, these secondhand shoes cost 20, but originally they only paid $1 for it, for example. It is quite smart. Um, and then going on to things like charity. So there are three pillars to the Orthodox faith, which is prayer, almsgiving, which is charity within the church, and fasting. And I'm sorry to say, I've only got one pillar, which is prayer. And I'm sort of slacking on that one, but I go to church every Sunday, and I will go tomorrow. Um, but like almsgiving, I give at the church, so you could sort of consider it like that. Um, the church fathers teach you whenever somebody asks for money, you just give it to them. And there's lots of examples like that. Um, if memory serves, a big one was John Chrysostom in Constantinople. And there was a beggar who came and asked him for money, so he gave him money. The same beggar came back the next day, same thing. And on that very same day, a third time came back and he gave him all of his money just because the guy asked for it. Now, I have asked my priest, Father Christopher, about this because you used to see a lot of beggars in the Moscow metro, and he said basically they're scammers, right? So these people, quote unquote, without legs, right? They have legs, it's just hidden. And he has seen, quote unquote, miracles happen where, a pregnant lady who is asking for money all of a sudden becomes not pregnant, right? So she takes out the pillow from under her jacket, right? Miracle. It's fantastic. So he recommended not to give money to beggars like that. So typically I don't. And I recommend to my friends, like, don't give money to beggars because they'll just use it for drugs or alcohol, that sort of thing. Better to give it to a well-known charity, especially a charity where you know where the finances are going. I know, for example, Vice President Biden, he was in charge of a cancer charity for a long time, and it was something like 1% of all the money they raised actually went to cancer research, right? Whereas the people who were working there got the rest of the money. And so in the United States, these nonprofits, you can have very high salaries at the nonprofits, even though you don't actually give so much money to places, to where your charity is designed to go. It's a little bit like gambling, and the most I ever gamble is maybe a couple of bucks at poker night, if that. Otherwise, I have been to a casino once in Pennsylvania and with my parents, and it was very, very depressing. Just seeing people sit there pulling on slot machines. You don't really see people at the poker tables, maybe the roulette tables, but I have never like actually gambled in my life. Some of my poker buddies have. They've gone to Vegas. They've won some money. And the last one was Atlantic City. So they went to Atlantic City for the weekend, went gambling there. In the States, the stereotype is that Indians control the gambling halls, right? And on reservations, especially in the West, you'll find them in charge. Otherwise, on the East Coast, it is private corporations, and of course, they all pay taxes. Versus in Russia, it is controlled by the state or it is illegal. So I think in Sochi they have gambling halls, but it's run by the Russian government. I know in the Baltic states, online gambling has really become a thing. And so it's really, really easy to get a job in these online gambling companies. And I know some of my students who are, highly involved in these sorts of things. And what's interesting is that we call this a vice industry, right? So vice is a sin, it's bad. Virtue is the opposite. Virtue is something good. And so these people who are involved in gambling, they understand it's bad. They understand it's evil. And so they're very shameful about talking about it. And yet the money is so good that they just keep doing it, right? So it's like principles versus reality. The next one is about, giving tips. So in Russia, typically people do not tip. And I recommend everyone not to tip because the waiters, the waitresses, the delivery guys, they all make a decent salary here, and it's stipulated by law. If they didn't want that salary, right, they shouldn't have chosen to work there. And I'm starting to think this about America as well. because it's gone up from like 10% is mandatory usually, and now it's become like 20% is mandatory, right? And it's only going to get higher, and everybody asks for a tip. Often what I tell my students is it would be like I teach you a class, right? And then I ask for a tip, right? So say, hey, if you like this class, please consider giving me, $1, that sort of thing. Um, it has become a huge thing in American culture. And it's quite interesting how everybody is, going with it. People go along to get along. And so it's very awkward when I go back to the States and I just press 0, right? Every single time. Unless it's a place where we go back to constantly and people know us, that sort of thing. Um, Now, there's another good word, it's called haggling or negotiating. And I know I talked about it last podcast, which I was called the haggler for a bit. I always recommend, especially with salaries, is do the sort of Trump thing. So you ask for a ridiculously high amount, and then they have to at least raise what they were going to offer you by a little bit, right, to meet you somewhere. Um, and really just be very confident about it, be very straightforward. When I have gone into job interviews, especially about teaching in the past, I tell them, like, these are my credentials. I'm looking for this amount of money. If you can't beat it, I don't want to waste your time. I don't want my time wasted either. Let's just say it was nice to meet you and say goodbye, right? Um, so I always recommend be straightforward, especially about money. Although growing up, it was a little bit taboo talking about money, and it was another something I had to get over, right? Especially owning my own business and working for myself. Um, yeah, otherwise, taxes, they vary a lot. Make sure you pay your taxes, right? I always say. But I am a bit of a libertarian, and I think, like, don't pay the taxes if you don't know where your tax money is going. Um, and I am not suggesting this legally, right? But from a theoretical perspective, I think if you don't like your government, that is probably one of the best ways to protest, really. And it's a silent protest. You probably will get in trouble, right? Because it's illegal not to pay your taxes. But it's like you don't give your consent, right, to bombing these countries, right, to the military industrial complex, that sort of thing. Um, so I think it's much better for a country to just put on sales tax, right, and that's how you pay your taxes. Over in Europe, right, and Russia as well, all of the sales tax is included in the prices whenever you go shopping, so it makes it sort of secret, right? You don't really think about taxes as much as you do in America. Because in America, you pick up something, oh, it's $1.99, but you go to check it out and it's like $2.20, for example. Whereas if you go to a place in Europe and it's $1.99, you go to checkout, it is also $1.99, right? So there's no discrepancies there, but I think I like it better in the States because it forces you to think about taxes. And well, the country was formed because we fought against a 3% sales tax on tea and coffee, right? That was the rebellion. Of course, there was a lot more to it than just that, but it was a big part of it. Um, I always laugh with my students because I say, like, how much does the government have to tax you until you revolt, until you refuse? And you'd be surprised, I hear up to 60%, right? And that just blows my mind because that means you're a slave to the government, right? You're working for the government there. Um, and I always say, like, well, Americans revolted over 3%, and now the average taxes in America is like 30%, right? 10 times higher, somewhere around there. But Again, don't forget about that good money vocabulary. Our idioms, once again, give it a whirl, fish out of water, in the fast lane. Um, I write books, so check out my books if you want to see and really dive into a deeply developed fantasy world where you can get attached to the characters, really get to know them. Likewise, make sure to share this, and I will see you guys next time. Thank you for listening. This has been Every Week English with Josh Golson.